James Bewley, the head of public programs at the Hammer, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's program, A Conversation with Dana Goodyear and Stanley Crouch. This event is associated with the Masters of American Comics exhibition, which is currently on view upstairs in our galleries and downtown at MoCA. Professor Crouch contributed an essay on George Herriman for the exhibition catalog. Stanley Crouch is before I do that, state law now requires that I let you know where the exits are in this hall. And I haven't done it yet, so this is exciting. The exits is actually the same way that you came in, which is that door over there. There's also a way to get out if you go through that curtain too, but best to just go that way. Everyone rush that way. All right. Stanley Crouch is a columnist, novelist, essayist, critic, and television commentator. Since 1987, he has served as an artistic consultant at Lincoln Center and is a co-founder of Jazz at Lincoln Center. Crouch is the recipient of both the MacArthur Foundation grant and the Gene Stein Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He has written 3 collections of essays and is currently working on a biography of jazz great Charlie Parker. Los Angeles-based writer Dana Goodyear is a senior editor at The New Yorker. Her poetry has appeared in several journals and publications, including American Poetry Review, The New Yorker, The New York Review of Books, The New York Times Book Review, The Paris Review, The Yale Review, and Open City. Honey and Junk, her first collection of poems, was published in the spring of 2005. Please join me in welcoming Dana Goodyear and Stanley Crouch.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to the Hammer for having us both. And I wanted to say to Stanley, welcome home to Los Angeles, where you were born, right?
Yeah.
You miss it, don't you?
No. Not really. But I'm going to work on it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I hope tonight changes your mind a little bit. But I thought since we are here as part of the exhibit of the Masters of American Comics, maybe we should talk a bit about your contribution to the exhibit and the work of George Herriman.
Well, George Herriman is probably the first modern American cartoonist. When I say modern, I mean whose cartoons had the attitudes that we became familiar with in later work from other cartoonists who looked beyond just the comical occasion or the tale of somebody who was in the army or involved in some kind of an adventure or some kind of police work, or some woman who was having a series of terrible love affairs, like Brenda Starr or somebody. So he was a little bit ahead of that, but his work did use those same elements, except he tended to use them in a rather absurd way, or a way in which he would emphasize the absurdity of the way that people tended to fall in love with other people, or the way that the law might be used, or the instability of things. Like one of his favorite things was to completely change the environment from panel to panel. So it would be you and I be having a conversation, and the panel behind us would be a curtain, and in the next panel we would be in the desert, still sitting talking, and then the next one would be we'd be on a ship or something. He was, and so to me that was his that was his sense of just the instability of things.
And he was often depicting a surreal environment, even with, I mean, it's a surreal tactic to change the backdrop in that way,
Right.
but even within that, there were these strange mesas and painted deserts and things like that. And did that come out of his biography, or was that totally an invented world?
He was born in New Orleans, but he left with his parents, and there was a period in which he lived near Monument Valley, and he apparently fell in love with that landscape. And I make mention of the fact in the essay that it's interesting that Monument Valley was important to him one way, and it's important to John Ford another way. And of course, he had an unusual life because he seems to have been a Broyard type. That is, he was a black American, but he was light enough for the white people to not really be sure, or necessarily to even question it.
Right.
But he did have a habit of keeping his hat on all the time. And so I say in the essay that the reason he probably kept his hat on was because if anybody had wondered ever, if they had any questions about his ethnicity, if he'd ever taken his hat off, he would have answered the question.
Right.
And so I think he was a bit strange.
And he's a good example of a type that you're interested in throughout your critical work, of a black American who's at the very center of American culture, whether or not people knew he was black.
Right.
Here is a black man informing popular culture in the most public way. I mean, he was in the Hearst newspapers every Sunday for years and years and years with Crazy Cat. Is that?
Oh yeah. Well, the other thing is that he's a perfect example of how things that happen in the United States can be the exact opposite of what people think they should be or think they are.
Right.
You know, here you have a guy who drew this comic strip that was extremely way out.
Yeah.
It's way out right now.
Wait,
So you know that.
in case there's anyone in the audience who doesn't know the basic plot elements, will you just describe the strange love triangle that?
Oh yeah, well there's this mouse and this cat and this dog, and the cat is in love with the mouse, but some kind of way the cat always makes a mistake and somehow gives the dog the impression that he's talking to him, and the dog always picks up a brick and throws a brick and busts the cat in the head, and then that makes him feel, oh, I'm loved by someone. That's kind of the way.
So it's all these inverted
Yeah,
relationships.
it's all
The wrong
all
people love the
nuts.
wrong people, and isn't Crazy Cat also gender ambiguous?
Very.
Yeah.
Right. No one knows what anything is. I mean, you assume that the officer, the
Officer
cop,
cop.
is a man. You assume that.
Right.
But you can't really prove it. It's just that he acts like you would think that a man would act. But then I was
Arresting people, taking names, that kind of thing.
right. You will see. I was looking at TV and I saw this film. It made me wish that Herriman had been able to see it, because it was a dog who suffered from narcolepsy, and so the dog would just be running across the grass and fall asleep. You know what I'm saying? And I thought to myself, I said, now if Herriman had ever seen that, there's no telling what he would have done with it. You know what I'm saying? You know, but it was funny, because the dog was just the regular dog thing, and boom, it was asleep on the grass, right? I said, oh, okay, now that's perfectly in line with the disjunctures between normality and that between normality and the unexpected
Right.
that you get from Herriman.
One of the things that I find really appealing about his work is that the way he spells, which is totally it's phonetic and it's in dialect and it's obviously intentional, but it gives a real humor and a real kind of immediacy to all of the dialogue in the cartoons.
Right. Well, see that but you know, when he did that, you know, you'd had a number of things that were popular in the United States in which writers were trying to imitate these other ways of speaking, and you actually can't even imagine something like Pogo without Crazy Cat, because I think Crazy Cat made it clear to Walt Kelly, well, I can do whatever I want to do.
Right.
You know, and so he invents this whole world and all these people who speak in this strange Southern dialect,
Right.
all these animals, and I think that it was that he was one of the major spinoffs, and Walt Disney and a bunch of people, because he was. But the thing is, you know, but the thing I mean earlier is that the very fact that William Randolph Hearst, who was an capitalist, saw him and just liked his cartoons, and so he just said, keep them in the paper.
Right.
There was no reason. I mean, if someone had come to Hearst and started a discussion about American surrealism and Crazy Cat,
Right.
Hearst probably would have said, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
He said, "Well, you know, this is a very surreal comic that you print every Sunday." He said, "That's not why I like it."
Right.
He said, "Well, why do you like it?" He said, "Because it's funny."
Right.
You know, he wouldn't have known at all. He might have. You know, he might have, but I doubt it.
Right.
I doubt it. But you see, I think that, but I think also that the frame of slapstick comedy was so strong in terms of American narrative at that time that if you went to the movies, I mean, in a Keystone comedy, you're accustomed to people being pursued by police in a car,
Right.
and they run upstairs, and then the car drives upstairs. You know, I mean, anything goes, and so because Max Sennett, he didn't have any plots. He would come to the set with some notes, and he'd say, "You are going to steal some bread from him, and he's going to chase you."
Right.
And it would start like that.
Right.
And so I think that
And was mostly improvised then?
mostly,
Yeah.
mostly, and a lot of the times you get the feeling that's one of the things that is most exciting about George Herriman's work is you really get the feeling that he really is improvising.
Yeah.
That when he came in and started to draw his comic, that he probably started to make it up or added things while he was in the process of drawing it. You know, and it has that kind of a quality that there's a surprise coming, that you know that it's not going to be what you think it's going to be.
Right.
But he has these things that he has these refrains that he uses, you know, like the brick, and I think like the brick is his version of the pie, of the slapstick comedy. In fact, as you know,
a little harsher.
Well, as you know, there's this heifer in the New Yorker. I was trying to get you to throw a
kidding.
pie in her face, but you wouldn't do it. But anyway,
Like, because I'm a normal
yeah,
person.
right. Yes, true. I couldn't get you to just make that.
Well, let's
One
talk
more
about
move.
your book. Let's talk about The Artificial White Man, which is out in paperback now, right? And on New York Times Book Review paperback row, I think. But I was thinking about this in the context of improvisation, because I bet that the reason that you like George Herriman as an artist is because of improvisation, since that's, I think, a theme throughout your work. Artists you admire, whether they're jazz musicians or writers or filmmakers, tend to be people who think on their feet and win when they think on their feet. They're victorious. And there's in the long piece about about Quentin Tarantino in this book, you deal with that in the figure of Alabama from True Romance.
Right.
When she is surprised, and is it in a motel room, I think?
Right. In some cheap motel in Hollywood.
Uh-huh. You do miss it, I think.
No. No. Not that far.
What is it about? Is improvisation a particularly American characteristic, or what is it about it that makes you admire people who succeed at it?
Well, I think that it's so basic to American life. Mm-hmm. I think on the one hand, the country was more or less improvised. Mm-hmm. That is, that you'd have, I mean, for instance, when a number of people went by wagon train to the Midwest, right? They thought the Midwest was going to be like Kentucky. And when they got there, they were faced with plains, and then they invented these side houses and stuff. Now, of course, they have side houses in Ireland too. But the point is that they didn't. When they got there, they said, "Oh, where are the forests? Well, there are none.
Right.
Well, what are we going to do now? I guess we're going to have to figure out another way to make houses."
Right.
And a lot of American life has resulted from things having to improvise themselves into shape, and we're so aware of that as a cultural value that you see it's something that appears over and over in American film. I've never seen anything written about it, but it's you and I are facing some monster that's come, through Westwood. Mm-hmm. And it's eating up all these people in here. We're trapped back in here someplace. So while these people, we hear people screaming and just like, oh no, we can't, and we can't get out of there. So some way we figure out while we're back here, some way to get him. And you see that over and over in American horror films.
Right.
It's like the monster is bigger, stronger. Sometimes he's invincible to the conventional weaponry, and they have to the people who are confronted. They have to figure out a way to get him. Right. They have to outsmart him. They have to and they have to improvise a way to win. And one of the best examples. And I think what will probably be one of the most enduring examples is the first Alien. Mm-hmm. Is that when she, at the very end, when Ripley is about to go to sleep, and then oh, he's in here. And then she has to figure out what to do. Yeah. And she does. It makes her a particularly American heroine of a sort. Well, first thing, you don't have European heroines who deal with violence anyway. Mm-hmm. I was sitting with a French guy once. We were looking at an American movie. Oh yeah, we were looking at a D.W. Griffith movie, and there was this. It's the one. It's the one. Unfortunately, he made just as World War I was about to start, and it's more or less a pacifist movie, and people really didn't want to see that then. He'd spent all his money, but there's this woman who, at one point, she discovers that he did his 4 different stories that are thematically intolerance and that are interwoven, and he she realizes that her boyfriend is in danger. There's going to be an attack by this other army, right? And so she's dancing in the court, and then she decides she's not going to dance anymore. And she goes out and she knocks this guy down and takes his chariot and rides off, you know. And so the French guy said to me afterwards, he said, it was years before you even got a woman in a French movie who would do that. That is, who would just make a decision and start just going, I'm going to do this and go through whatever got in the way, you know. And I think that, but with Ripley, but see, the thing that is great about Ripley in the first Alien, because she becomes more and more of a man as the series goes on, and therefore less interesting. But the thing is that she's the first thing is she's always terrified. You know, it's when she realizes in the last scene that the monster is there, she reacts the way people really do react. Because one of the great things that that Mike Tyson said once was that Customato had who taught him to box. He told him, he said, Mike, what you have to understand about the hero is that the hero is afraid like the other guy is afraid. He said the only difference between the hero and the coward is that the fear experienced by the hero doesn't control him. He said that's what makes a coward, is that this is a person who's manipulated by his fear. He said because the point is everyone who gets in the ring is afraid of getting hit.
Right.
You know, like if you meet some guy who says, "Yeah, I'm a boxer because I like to get hit," you'll say, "Oh, this man is sick."
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You know, that's not that's not it. It's that you say, "Okay, well now I'm just not going to panic." Right. And what she does in that scene is so great because she doesn't, because you can look at her and you can tell she is absolutely terrified by this creature, right?
Right.
But she says she doesn't panic.
So to go back to Tarantino for a minute, there's so much violence in his movies that there is a lot of opportunity for improvisation, because if you don't improvise and come up with something, you're going to get squashed. And I mean, a lot of people fail that test, but does he create a particularly good arena for seeing people perform that kind of improvisation? And are they often women in his movies, or?
In True Romance, the thing with True Romance, that to me is one of the greatest scenes in movies. Is when this is before The Sopranos, when James Gandolfini is just a big thug in the movie, just a big well-dressed Italian goon, and so he's beating her up. You know, he's a little bitty. That actress, she's no bigger than Reese Witherspoon. She's small, and so he's beating her up, and he's trying to get her to tell him. He's trying to get her to tell him where this dope that her boyfriend has stole from them is hidden. And so twice she does something that is really remarkable. At first he's beating her up, she's like bleeding and everything, and then she takes out this corkscrew. And she holds it up like she's going to try to stick him in the chest. And he says, "Oh, ha, 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 oh." He said, "Yeah, well, come on, baby. Yeah, here, right here. Stick it in right here, right." And when he moves, like when he gets both his arms up here like this, then she pushes it through his foot, which he would have. Now, if she'd ever given the impression she was going to do that, he'd have stopped her.
Right.
But that's the kind of thing that happens to you in a fight. If you really don't, not so much if you know what you're doing, but if you think. And so when she does that, and then later on, then he continues to beat her up, and then she throws her in the bathroom and breaks all this glass and everything. So at one point, she looks at him and she starts laughing at him, you know. And she says, "Oh, you look stupid." And he goes, "What?" And then he looks in the mirror, and when he looks in the mirror, she snatches she snatches this aerosol can and this cigarette lighter, and she sets them on fire. But the logic of it is perfect. When you look at it, everything that she does is exactly the way somebody who's in a desperate improvisational mode would do everything.
Right.
None of it's contrived. Everything she does looks like that's what someone who's thinking on their feet, as they say, would conclude. And I thought that was pretty brilliant.
You've been interested in Tarantino for a long time. Can I read a passage from the All-American Skin Game, and then we can get back into the essay in the current book, which it really sort of dominates and sets the theme for the current book. So I think it would be good to talk about that a little bit, if I can find this. You write in this essay, Eggplant Blues, Tarantino is deeply intrigued by the artistic challenges of the many miscegenations that shape the goulash of American culture, and by how powerfully the influence of the Negro helps define even those whites who freely assert their racism. Pulp Fiction presents his most recent variations on Carl Jung's observation that white Americans walked, talked, and laughed like Negroes, and that the black American was one of the two figures appearing most often in their dreams. Can I first ask you why you use the word Negro and how long you've been doing that?
Well, first thing, African American, that's a mouthful. And I remember watching these guys try to push that on white folks.
Uh-huh.
And they said, "Well, what do you think about African American opinion? On what do you think about the African?" And it was hard for them to say it. It was hard for them to say it. And I said, and then it was phony. Because, they called me you get called by these people. And so they said, "Well, what do you think? That Jesse Jackson and these people have said that they've come to the conclusion that in order to achieve their identity, that black Americans have to give up being black Americans and become African Americans." And I said, "Well, they didn't ask me. And they didn't ask anyone I know. So I don't really know who they asked. I don't know how big a poll they took. I think it was just him and Toussaint and a number. It was some politicians and some academics, and they got together and they had a dinner or something. And they said, "Yeah, we need to connect to our African heritage. Yeah, that's right. We should be African American. Yeah, let's do that." And then they had a press conference. Ask anybody. There's no substantial poll done by them. They claim to speak for black America, right? We're now going to tell you what we as black Americans want to be called, African Americans. Okay, now here's the first problem. I know Africans who are Americans. They are different from me and from them that are out here who are not Africans, because they are African Americans.
Right.
You know what I mean? See, it's not to me. I don't have anything. The African thing isn't the problem. It's just the fraud of it.
Right.
It's that you say, well, because the first thing is it's an attempt. It's an attempt to emulate something like Italian American, mm-hmm. right? But that's also a reaction to a country. See, Africa isn't a country; it's a continent.
Right.
And so when you say I'm an African American, that means you're a West African and an East African. That means you're a North African and a South African. Right. That means you're an African from the middle, from the Congo, from the middle of the continent. And then that means, listen, it's insane.
It reminds me of Teresa Heinz Carey saying that she was an African American, and people went nuts when she
was
did
right.
That. By that.
See, no, I had this blonde assistant who was from South Africa. And when people used to invite me to parties for a while, just for fun, I would say, well, I have a South African assistant. Do you mind if I bring her? And so when I would bring her, people would say, well, who is she? I said, no, they'd say, oh, I thought you were going to bring your assistant. I said, this is her. She's from South Africa. She was born in South Africa. So, and if she gets American citizenship, she'll be an African American. You know what I mean? So, so that's kind of what that, See, and that's the problem. Like you said, the thing with Carrie's wife was that she was right.
Right.
But the American confusion over ethnicity versus race or genetic heritage is very complicated and stupid, really. Because the first thing is you could only, like I and every other black person in this room knows people who look almost as light as you or like you, who have black people in their family and might have sisters and brothers who are dark.
Right.
Because I remember there was a family that lived across the street from me. Every other kid looked different. It's like the first son, Junie, was a big black Negro. Right, so that was Junie. Then his brother, Bruce, was light and had red hair, right? Then the next one was black. Then the next one was light. And both of the parents were black. I mean, black. So now the thing is, that just means that in the gene pool were these recessive genes, if you will, that appeared when they felt like appearing.
Right.
He couldn't say, well, okay, now what are we gonna have this time? I said, we'll have a dark one this time. Well, you wanna have a light one next time? Yeah, let's have a light one. It wasn't like that, But it came out. There was a symmetry to it, but it was just that kind of unusual thing.
Right.
And so I think that black Americans are often such a genetic mix too, that it's kind of insipid to try to deny the range of people. Like in my own family, I have my great-great-grandfather was from Madagascar, and he came over here in 1863, and he jumped ship on a Portuguese ship. He jumped ship, he married a Choctaw Indian, he moved to Arkansas, and then he had kids. And so my grandmother looked like an Indian, and my mother looked like an Indian from Asia. And she used to have this turban she would wear. The white people would go, they would think she was from somewhere else, and she really enjoyed that, right? Yes, they don't know what I am. So anyway, So she liked to do that. But now my father's side, they're from a plantation in Atlanta, run by this, that was owned by this family, this Crouch family, who were Anglo-Irish. So that means I have African, Asian, American Indian, or Native American, and Black American. So that means I'm an all-American guy.
Right.
And I still look like this. Right? You know what I'm saying? But I mean, that's just more the way that it really is.
Yeah.
And I think that would be much more interesting if we wanted to, if we really spent more time thinking about that, because Americans are so often, not just the black Americans, but so many Americans are so often mixtures of many different kinds of people.
Right.
You know, and another thing is that, you know, like when you get, it's like, and you always have, and different styles, different weather conditions and different styles will reveal discontinuity. For instance, like once the Afro was popularized, right? By the middle 70s, it became a Midwestern hairdo that women, most of whom seemed to weigh, they were a median weight of about 180, and they would have this Afro hairdo, right? And now, if it wasn't the 70s, no one could have convinced me 20 years before that white women's hair could even do that. Now, that is, crinkle up like that.
Right.
Now, the thing is, that made me wonder, you know, because that's not something you see every day. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there were a number of them with their hair like that kind of suggested to me that there was the content, the genetic content was a little different than we might have thought.
Uh-huh.
You know, because see, when I was a kid, see, my father and my aunt and people like that, they would say, they'd say like, well, now you know the Jews are our cousins. I said, yeah. I said, how did you conclude that? And so they would say, well, have you ever, they'd say stuff like, have you ever looked at the hair those Jews got? And I said, no, I haven't paid that much attention to it, because I was a little boy. I didn't really. So what are you going to say? Yes, I've looked. Yes, I'm 10 or 11, and I've looked at thousands of them. You just go, no, I don't really know what you mean. And so they would always say, they'd say, well, whenever you see a white person with hair like yours, you can be sure of one thing: they're not all white. You can believe that. And so I know when I went to Europe, where they make the real white people up in Northern Europe, you don't see that.
Right.
Now I don't know how scientific all that is, but but I think there's a lot, you know, there's a lot to be said for genetic variety.
Well, that's a gripe that you have with contemporary American fiction, right? That that it's so factionalized, and people don't acknowledge the miscegenation that is very much at the center of American culture.
Right. Yeah. Well, you don't. Well, I mean, you know, because people. The first thing is that people. I don't think they. I think that it doesn't allow a writer the freedom of the imagination that is supposed to be central to writing. Right. See, I mean, like when I was a young guy, I used to teach over here in East Los Angeles on Breed Street near Brooklyn Avenue. So I was over there for a while, and so I wasn't thinking about writing any fiction or anything at that time, but if I had have decided to do it, I might have incorporated some of the many things that I heard and saw people do while I was there. Now, if I had done that at that time, nobody really would have said anything about it. They would have either liked it or they wouldn't have. But later, when different ethnic groups began to be very possessive about their people, then people would have said, well, that's not your background. You don't know. You can't write about that. You know,
Right.
blah 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 blah. And so I think the essay that I wrote in The Artificial White Man about that is because I think that the fear that writers have of being of writing about stuff they actually